How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've done an actual proper challenge run here. Today, I'm excited to bring this one to you as I was lucky enough to take part in the Backlogs challenge for Dark Souls 2, where myself and a bunch of other streamers and YouTubers went through the game trying to one or two shot every boss, mini-boss, and NPC in the game. Now, the key difference from the Dark Souls 1 contest, which of course I did not take part in, is that we are going to be allowing two shots because of the way that a lot of the Dark Souls 2 bosses are structured, where they have colossal amounts of HP and damage isn't quite what it was compared to Dark Souls 1. Anywho, the basic rundown is we're going to go through the game. You know, we have to progress through the areas as we would, and if we get stuck on a boss that we can't kill, we can't progress. Every target is worth 1 point if you two-shot them, or 2 points if you one-shot them. Well, let's hop into it. First step in our run is choosing our starting class. So with the Explorer, just for some extra goodies. It's not super important for what we're going to do, but we do need to go ahead and take the Petrified Something as our starting gift, as making use of the things betwixt crow trades are going to be an integral part of this run. Starting off on our journey, there's obviously going to be quite a bit of setup before we start taking on bosses proper, but we can, of course, go to Hyde's Tower of Flame and take down our first boss in the Dragon Rider. Personally, I've never actually done this. I usually fight the Dragon Rider just outright because I want to. Most of the time I do my Dark Souls 2 playthroughs, but I actually got him to fall off once, but died in the process, so I had to come back. Couldn't get the stab attack to work on the first try, so I had to kite him around near the beginning of the entrance and eventually take him down. This, because it counts as an environmental kill, is going to be worth 2 points for us. Not really going to keep track of points per se in this run, but if you want to take a look at the target list, I'll be sure to link a copy of that in the video description down below if for some whatever reason you want to try this. Spoiler alert, don't. It was a journey and a half. Of course, there wasn't really a particular reason I decided to do that first. I just kind of wanted to get the one boss out of the way at the start of the journey. And here we're going to go into something a little bit different than how all the challenge runners did it in the Dark Souls 1 version. And that is basically, we figured that it was a good idea to just cut down on the amount of time that people are going to spend on mundane things, such as grinding for levels, materials, and whatnot. So the general rule was you can use Cheat Engine or another external device to basically give yourself anything that you have access to in the game at the stage that you're at. So because of course you can kill enemies endlessly by going into the Covenant of Champions, we can give ourselves enough souls, and if you know much about the Dark Souls 2 damage system, even getting up to 99 in all stats isn't really a titanic boost to your damage, although it is going to be necessary for this run. And this item duplication thing will come on a little bit later, such as when we are grinding for materials for upgrading our weapons. Of course, there are many options for us to grind those out, such as down to the gulch, which we will end up doing. But yeah, just to cut down on the amount of time, because this video is already going to be quite long, and that doesn't include the 50, 60, 70 plus hours that I have that were cut from this video. Now that that's out of the way, we can actually start making ourselves a proper build. First on our to-do list here in the early game is heading over and picking ourselves up one copy of the Greatsword. And then we headed over to the Forest of the Fallen Giants to purchase the Blacksmith Key from Melentia, as well as the 3 bright bugs that she carries in her inventory. These are going to be critical items, of course, in this type of run, as they provide us a solid 20% damage boost, but they are in limited quantities. She will sell 3 of them every time you kill one of the 4 soul bosses or the Looking Glass Knight, but she also does not restock them indefinitely. So if we do make some routing choices that lock off a Great Lord soul without purchasing the 3 bright bugs, that could come back to bite us in the end. Luckily it didn't, just a little bit of a spoiler, but these are again going to be a very important element to our run here. And then back in Majula, we go ahead and talk to Shalquar to pick up the Silvercat ring so we can make our journey down into the gutter a little bit easier. We also go ahead and unpetrify Rosabeth, which will unlock her as a vendor, but it'll also let us get through this early portion of the game and find ourselves the red Tearstone ring, which is a 20% boost to physical damage, which makes it quite a bit weaker than it was in Dark Souls 1. And it also allows us to talk to the head of Vengarl, and he will sell us unlimited greatswords, so now we can power stance them. And he is the vendor that also sells unlimited gold pine resin. We also stop off in the Grave of Saints to pick up Whisper of Despair, which subtracts 200 physical defense points from any enemy that gets hit with it. And then down in the Gulch, we can also farm, quote unquote, these worm guys to show that we can get both large Titanite shards and Titanite chunks. But again, we're just going to spawn these in once we have provided proof that we can actually get them at the stage of the game that we're at. Still no second boss yet, as we head back to the Forest of Fallen Giants to start the Creighton and Pate quest lines, and we pick up the Titanite slab that's in the area. Because our soul memory is so high, we can also go through the Shrine of Winter up to Drangliec Castle, where we can farm the Royal Swordsman outside for chunks and Titanite slabs. And somewhat astonishingly, I don't think I've had this happen. I wasn't wearing any item discovery boosting gear, but I got a Titanite slab for my first kill out here, which was a pleasant surprise. And because Drangliec Castle is open to us, we can pick up the Frozen Flower and head into the Frozen Aleum Lois DLC, where there are a couple of goodies that we can pick up. The one that we're most interested in at this stage in the playthrough is the Dark Clutch Ring, which adds some AR to dark type attacks, including infused weapons, and whenever you're using weapon buffs. Again, the math on it is quite nebulous, but just know that it is going to be a key part of our run, as well as whatever other clutch rings that we can pick up. And because I didn't really want to deal with the Lycia questline, and I figured I wanted to go through to Huntsman's Copse early, I did go ahead, try to aggro her, and I was going to try to push her off using the R2 of the Great Sword attack. However, after attacking her and trying it a few times, I reloaded the area and she wasn't there. I even checked back at the Rotunda, and I couldn't find her. I did some searching, and apparently this has happened to other people before, where you aggro her, you don't see her die, but she just kind of despawns. So I really don't know what happened here. I did end up killing her later in the run, spoiler alert, by respawning her. But yeah, this is a glitch that I found a couple people had, and I have no idea why it happened. I'll just chalk it up to Dark Souls 2 being Dark Souls 2. At this point, I was a little tired of doing some prep work, so I decided that let's go ahead and take down an early game boss, an easy boss, one of the easiest, and maybe even the easiest boss in the entire game, in the Royal Rat Vanguard. Of course, there are some mobs here, but we can one-shot them like without any issue, really, by using the power stance attack with dual greatswords. Now, with the issue with Lycia not being available to me either to purchase the movement of the Rotunda or to kill her for the Rotunda Lockstone, I just decided that let's just go ahead and spawn it in. Again, I really have no idea what happened with the glitch, but this allows us to get to Huntsman's Copse, where we can purchase Resonant Weapon, which at 99 Faith and Intelligence is the strongest weapon buff in the game in terms of raw damage, although there are some situations where other buffs will be better. But for the most part, this is going to be the weapon buff that we're going to want to use. One final piece of gear before we take on our next boss, and really the first proper boss of the run, is going to be going back to Things Betwixt, using our smooth and silky stones, and resetting for the Channeler's Trident, which of course the two-handed R2 weapon dance buff thing that it does gives you an increase in damage for about 15 seconds. It's pretty weak, but we got to scrap out and claw for every single piece of damage increase that we can get in this run. Now, with all of our buffs in hand, we can finally head back to the Forest of the Fallen Giants to take on our first real test of this run in the Last Giant. And I got to say, this was kind of early in my run, but I really didn't have the buff routine down, so this was definitely one of the sloppier ways of buffing, where we don't cast a bunch of stuff outside the fog wall, but in the end it ended up working out for us, and we take down the Last Giant for 2 more points. For our next boss, I decided to take a point deduction here. I do think it is easy enough to actually one-shot the Pursuer, but I figured it was only right in a situation like this that we had a little bit of fun and take him down with the Ballistas. Again, in my testing, I was able to actually one-shot him with a couple of different setups, but for the content and because I think it's kind of a funny way to do it, I decided to go with the parry strat and again take him down with Ballistas. With the Pursuer down, this allows us to go to the Lost Bastille and pick up the Dull Ember, which unlocks Infusions for us. And Infusions are going to be very strong for many portions of this run, as again, you can buff infused weapons, and with the way that weapon buffs work in Dark Souls 2, generally speaking, you get more damage out of buffing an infused weapon, especially if you match the infusion, than you would by using a buff on an uninfused weapon. It's not always the case, but that's a general way to think about it. But in my early routing, as I did this quite a while ago before I did about the last 2/3 of my run, the idea I had in my mind was I got to make sure that I go ahead and get infusions unlocked in order to open up as many avenues as I possibly can early on. Now, another thing I did early on is I went to go kill Dark Diver Grandal because I didn't think that the Darklurker was going to be possible, so be sure to stick around to see if I was actually able to kill him or not. But I did want the Dragon Chime. It is the best lightning infusible chime in the game. So I did end up killing him here, but I ended up rolling back the save to revive him, so this kill doesn't technically count for the 2 points at this stage. While I was in the area, I decided to go back to the gutter and pick up the Great Club, as strike damage weapons are very, very strong in Dark Souls 2, and I thought this would be a good addition to the inventory. And then it was back into the Huntsman's Copse to continue on the Creighton and Pate questline. With our big bonk stick in hand, I wanted to go at the next target on my list, which was the Skeleton Lords, as there are some goodies behind them. Now, they are an interesting case where the boss health bar is tied to the total sum of HP of all of the enemies in the fight. Kind of similar to the Four Kings, but a little bit different, where you can't overkill an enemy to take down some of the health bar. So the rule was we had to one-shot every single boss or mob that spawns from the boss in the fight, if they are included in the health bar, in order to get the full 2 points in this case, or, for something a little bit later on, if we two-shot one of the enemies, it would only count for 1 point. But just 2 points in total. We don't get like an individual 2 points for every single enemy in the boss room. Behind them, we can enter the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant, which gives us the Sun Seal, which has the added benefit of giving us 5% more damage to our miracles. And one of the things that I plan to do with the Sun Seal was also go ahead and take down the mini-boss outside of the old Dragon Slayer fight in one hit, because I wanted to get Heavenly Thunder from Targray, which is locked behind the old Dragon Slayer, who we weren't able to one-shot, although this is another one in testing where I know it's possible to one-shot him. But for me, I just settled with the two-shot because I really wanted not only the Heavenly Thunder Miracle, but I also wanted the old Leo Ring, which adds 12.5% more damage to thrust attacks. And then because both of them are down, of course, we can go talk to Targray and pick up the Heavenly Thunder spell. Heading back to Harvest Valley, we can also farm these guys that ride the giant monsters, or whatever the heck they are. I'm not really sure myself. They can drop smooth and silky stones, which can be traded at the Crows for infinite Twinkling Titanite, which unlocks that as an upgrade option. They can also drop petrified dragon bones, so basically any type of weapon now we can pretty much fully max out. So a lot of the stuff that I have done up to this point was in service of trying to use Heavenly Thunder against the Rotten, because I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a shot. But when I actually went in there and cast it, let's just say it wasn't even close, which honestly was pretty discouraging, so we're going to have to shelve him for now. So instead of relying on spells, I said, you know what, let's do something a little bit sneaky here. Go back to the Forest of the Fallen Giants, pick up the Grand Lance that sits outside of the Giant Lord bonfire area, go back, buy a Bonfire Ascetic from Cloan, use it in the Forest of the Fallen Giants, and then pick ourselves up a second copy of the Grand Lance, which has an incredible 160 counter modifier, even if the actual in-game menu isn't exactly right because the counter modifier is actually a little bit lower. It's not super important for this run, but that's going to be a item that I was really focused on when thinking about some of the strategies for this run, because it's got good AR, it can be buffed, and of course has that super high counter modifier, which can be further augmented by the old Leo ring. So with our Power Stance Grand Lances, I decided to try this out against the Rotten, and when I went in there, you know, we're certainly doing an exceptionally higher amount of damage compared to Heavenly Thunder, but of course it's still not nearly enough to get the 2-shot. So again, we had to put him on ice for the moment, and instead I decided to take on the other big blob type boss in this game, and the Covetous Demon, who's everybody's favorite, and this time is a pretty clean 2-shot. I think it might be possible with some weird circumstances maybe to take him down, but I'm not entirely sure, and I'd be surprised if anybody does one-shot him, although he's right on the precipice of what I think might be possible. Next on the chopping block is Scorpion Najka, as she gates the Engraved Gauntlets. This was a bit of a persnickety one, as I tried a couple of times trying to get counter hits. Seems like her counter window isn't exceptionally large, and I had a couple of runs like this one where I left her on a sliver of HP. Luckily, with enough good timing and RNG, I was able to get her down. I really don't know what the ultimate difference was in my winning run, as I don't recall my setup being drastically different. Either way, Scorpion Najka is a 2-shot. At this point in the run, I'm pretty sure I had used up the last of the bright bugs that I was able to buy from Valencia our first go around, so I was looking up where to get the next one, and it was gated behind the Belfry Gargoyles and Belfry Soul. There are two bosses in the way, that is both the Ruined Sentinels and the Belfry Gargoyles. Of course, the Ruined Sentinels are comparatively weaker than a lot of the bosses that we've taken down, and quite a bit weaker than some of the later game bosses, so this one wasn't really too difficult. I think I actually got them on my first or second try, but it was a nice reprieve from some of the long drawn out attempts that I had on some of the previous bosses. And then, of course, immediately following them was the Belfry Gargoyles. You know, this one was pretty easy as well. Again, just as a reminder, even though I did say it, but this is another one of the bosses where the boss bar contains multiple bosses, but you can't overkill them, so we got to take down each and every one of the Belfry Gargoyles in one shot. I think this is probably the third easiest fight to do this in, outside of the Skeleton Lords and Prowling Magus and Congregation, so this one, no big deal either. Now, on to the next boss, and I have mentioned on a couple of previous bosses like the Pursuer and Old Dragon Slayer that they were able to be one-shot in some of my testing, and the next boss contributed to that pretty heavily. So the Royal Rat Authority soul can be transposed into Acid Surge. Now, this is generally pretty useless, or at least that's the general consensus that I can find online. However, it has a interesting property where on some bosses and PvE enemies, after you hit them with it, they will take an additional 5% damage. I think it's for 60 seconds. And in my testing, this actually stacks up infinitely. I'll put a brief clip in here. And as you can see, that when I do one hit against an enemy, you know, I only do a certain amount of damage, but after I use Acid Surge, it goes up. And then if I keep using Acid Surge over and over and over again, our damage tends to skyrocket. Unfortunately, this really seems to be contained to a lot of earlier bosses, and I was planning on using this against some later game bosses, but in my testing I really didn't get super far, so you know, it didn't work on as many as I thought it would. Back to the actual fight, this was easily the worst boss fight that I did in the entire run. I was sticking underneath 60 equip load because I wanted to get Flynn's ring later on, but I ultimately bit the bullet, making sure to keep some levels and getting myself into medium load with the Power Stance Greatswords. And after I finally made that decision, I was able to 2-shot him relatively easily. On my way back to Strayed, I thought I would go ahead and try to one-shot Lucatiel, but NPCs in this game tend to have quite a bit more HP than I originally anticipated. So I put her on the shelf for the moment, transposed that spell, and again, I talked about that a little bit. It does work on the next boss that I have in this video in Mytha, but the setup is a little bit tricky, so I ultimately just kind of went with the two-shot on that one as well, as this was honestly the point in the run where I was kind of getting into the modding scene. If you saw some of my videos on the Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, so I really put this run off for a little bit, but this was right before I started doing that, which is why I probably didn't dedicate as much time as I otherwise could have. Either way, I'm still happy with the two-shot on her. After Mytha, we of course take the most logical elevator in Souls history, and I went to try the Smelter Demon just to kind of see where I was at. Was quite a bit ways away off of him, so I pivoted instead, went to Brightstone Cove, took down the Mimic there for the Staff of Wisdom, and the Mimics are another target. They're worth 1 point or 2 point as well, and then went ahead and took down Polymagus and Congregation, which again is another one of those gang fights, which is pretty easy to do. I did die once, but it's kind of more so on the fact that I was trying to get the one-shots instead of two-shotting an enemy, as opposed to a skill issue. At least that's what I like to tell myself. While I was in the area, I also decided to take out Cromwell now. It's kind of the most ironic kill in this run for everybody that was involved in the competition, seeing as he will pardon you if you kill NPCs. And then I finally went back and took down the Flexile Sentry. Now, the thought that I had originally was using the Warped Sword in combination with Mytha's Bent Blade to try and proc both Poison and Toxic using the Power Stance attack of the Warped Sword. Didn't really end up making a difference as I tried it on the Smelter Demon. It can proc Poison, but the raw damage output just was not high enough with this combination, so I put that on shelf once again. Instead, because we were out of Bright Bugs at this point, I figured it was high time that we kill one of the 4 Lord Soul holders, and the Lost Sinner has the least amount of HP amongst all of them. I tried the Acid Surge strategy on her. As far as I can tell, it doesn't make a difference, or at least I could never get her to stand in one space for long enough. So I just went back to the tried and true counterattack with Power Stance Grand Lances. I do know that this is a boss that can be one-shot. As a spoiler alert, I'm recording some of these voiceovers after I watched J.K. Leeds' video, but I was not able to get her on this attempt. And speaking of J.K. Leeds, I do owe our favorite challenge punter a debt of gratitude here, as despite the fact that I have platinum this game, I own it like 3 times over, I think. I've probably played it for maybe, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 hours. I had literally zero idea that you could skip the Smelter Demon in Iron Keep and fight the old Iron King before him. Like, legitimately, I had zero clue that you go to the center console type area, turn off the fire there, and skip him entirely. Honestly, that saved the back half of this run, because this was the point where I was kind of crashing out and was like, well, I don't really know how many more bosses and NPCs I can actually get beyond this point, so maybe I'll just call it quits here. But again, he alerted me to that, and a very big thank you to him as well. Love your content, JK. And because we can skip by the Smelter Demon for the moment, we can actually farm the Phantom Invader up here for the Black Witch Domino Mask, which is a very rare drop, and this is an NPC that only spawns once in each game cycle. I don't even think that using Bonfire Ascetics respawns him. I'm not 100% sure about that, but this is an item that increases our spell damage, spell, miracle, hexes, whatever, by I think 3% for like 10% of your HP, which is really, really weak in comparison to some of the other entries in the series. It's kind of odd, and I honestly feel like this, as well as the blue dagger that you can hold in your offhand, which has a very similar effect, they almost feel like they are supposed to be like 15 or 30% instead of like 3%. But yeah, pretty weak overall, but something that we want to have just in case we end up using more magic-based stuff. And given that we have run into quite a bit of road blockage and taken down some of the bosses, I figured it was old Iron King time. Obviously a relatively easy boss. I tried two different strategies at the get-go, one with the Power Stance Great Lances, and then one with Power Stance Great Hammers. The Great Hammers were very, very close, but just not quite strong enough, so I figured it was high time that we book it back over to Brightstone Cove to pick ourselves up the Engraved Gauntlets finally. I've been trying to avoid them for the most part in this run, as I wanted to limit my reliance on them for some of these 1 and 2 shots, but push comes to shove, we had to eventually go and get them. This, of course, requires us to kill either Pate or Creighton, and then, of course, we get the other one for the points in the contest. Looking back at this, I'm actually pretty sure that this technically violates the rules of the competition. Didn't really realize it at this time, but I think they both took damage prior to it. I think it's kind of elementary that we are going to be able to one-shot them regardless, because backstabs in this game with big weapons are pretty strong, all things considered. So hopefully he doesn't dig me points for that, but if he does, it's no big deal, as this contest was just for a bit of fun anyhow. And then now with the Engraved Gauntlets in our possession, we can head back over to the old Iron King using our dual Great Hammer Power Stance setup once again. And this fight's a little bit interesting, the one that I'm showing in the video, because I thought for some reason that Acid Surge was actually working on him, as I had shown how it works in some bosses. Apparently it doesn't. I just got really lucky that the first time I went in here, I got a crit on my first hit and was able to two-shot him. Just kind of a bizarre stroke of luck, I suppose, and really thought that I had actually been able to use Acid Surge to effect in this fight. With the second DLC finally unlocked after the old Iron King defeat, we can go pick up some goodies from there. The most important one of these being the Sorcery Clutch Ring, which, again, clutch rings in this game are pretty good. And then we also farm ourselves a couple of chicken wings, just in case we want to use them for later. While I was here, I also tried to see if Acid Surge worked on Fume Knight, and unfortunately, it does not. With the Sorcery Clutch Ring in hand, I decided to traverse back to the Rotten to see if I could get him. Pretty close, but still not quite enough. And same thing with the Smelter Demon. I tried power stancing the Smelter Hammers. Again, fairly close, enough to be a 3-shot, I think, but not enough as well. So because I was floundering over and over against both of those bosses, I figured it was high time to switch up our pathing once again. This time we're going to go ahead and take down the Twin Dragon Riders. I think this is another fight where Acid Surge would actually work, but I really just didn't feel like putting in the effort to do that at this stage in the game. So I think I could have gotten the full 2 points, but I was happy enough taking the 1 by getting a 2-shot on the first guy and a 1-shot on the second guy. Now, before heading into the next area, I really wanted to try my hand at Darklurker. And when I was looking at some of the calcs that I was doing, I thought that it would be pretty close. Maybe if I got a lucky crit here or there, it was going to be possible. Come to find out that in the game, Darklurker is classified as a ghost-type enemy, similar to the guys that pop out of you in the wall in Drangliec Castle. And what that means is they literally have a 50% reduction on all incoming physical attacks. Yes, despite the fact that it already has pretty high physical defense, I think it's like 600 or something like that, which is up there for the base game, you just get a flat-out 50% reduction whenever you're using melee against him. So if you're ever fighting Darklurker, magic is the way to go. Got to be honest as well, I thought that there was no way that I was going to be able to get Darklurker at this stage in my run, so be sure to tune in to the end to see if I was able to get him and get Climax. So from one uber tanky boss to another one that's blocking our path in the Looking Glass Knight. And here I am deploying a strategy which I have not talked about yet and haven't really made use of. And that is the Poison Cloud, or in this case, the Dark Fog Hex. So one of the rules that we agreed on before starting off this contest was that if you were to hit an enemy with a debuff, such as Whisper of Despair or Acid Surge as I've shown, or in this case, Dark Fog, as long as the poison did not trigger from the Hex or Pyromancy, that does not count as a hit, And if you are to get the poison proc, say with using a resin or a poison infused weapon, that will count as a hit. So in theory, you could almost poison an enemy fully once, slap on a resin, hit him, and then have the physical damage and the poison proc, and then do the same thing again if you need to. I tried to temper my reliance on this strategy as well, not because I think it's cheap, but just because it's kind of a pain to set up. But this was a case where I really didn't see any other options, as the regular melee attempts were just not getting it done. So I ended up resorting to that. Ironically, in the winning run, I actually got a crit on the second attack, and while it didn't technically matter from a damage perspective, as the poison would have done enough to roll him over, it was funny because it ended up just ending the fight a lot quicker than it otherwise would have, and saved me some heartache later, say if I missed a dodge or something like that. Of course, one of the reasons I wanted to take down the Looking Glass Knight was to go to everybody's favorite area in Dark Souls 2 in the Shrine of Amana, which allows us to pick up Sunlight Blade, which is the second strongest buff in the game, relatively speaking. I think it's actually tied with Crystal Magic Weapon, but Lightning is a little bit stronger, just behind Resonant Weapon. And then, of course, there are going to be some areas where Lightning is quite a bit better than Dark. So this is a pretty serious power spike at this stage in the run. And with no real reason to deviate our path, it was Demon of Song time up next. This is the stage in the run where I stopped relying on the Power Stance Grand Lances so much, as they did great damage against the Demon of Song, 2600 basically. But when I finally made the switch over to Power Stance Greatswords, it easily cleared 3k and did more damage. So lesson learned for me at this stage was that even though we're getting these absurd counter damage from the Power Stance Grand Lances, the fact that the raw damage of the Greatswords is much higher, and they both have 130 counter damage, or if you're using the Pursuer's Ultra Greatsword, it has 140 counter damage. They are much more superior in terms of actual damage output than the Grand Lances themselves. While I was here, before I made my way through the Undead Crypt, I also figured it was a good time to take down the Milfinitos, but I'm pretty sure that after you kill the one up in the King's Tower, the other ones might despawn just outright. I'm not entirely sure about how their quest line works, to tell you the truth, so I ended up missing out on two of them. Again, my real focus was getting through the bosses and mini-bosses themselves. NPCs I didn't really care about, so I didn't roll my save back or anything like that. So I did end up missing on 4 points for those last two Milfinitos, but it wasn't a huge deal to me. Now, knowing what's coming up next in Velstadt, he has a colossal weakness to lightning, so my next goal was to pick up the Lightning Clutch Ring, which of course is locked behind the Rotten. Now, despite the fact that the Rotten is in the Gulch, surrounded by a bunch of poison, he's not immune, so it was time to head back to our strategy of using Dark Fog and then Rotten Pine Resin once again. This one's a little bit tricky because you have to hit him within a certain time frame after you cast the initial Poison Mist or Dark Fog in order to actually get the poison to take over. And one of the first runs I had when I was using the Grand Lances was very excruciating because I left him with literally 6 HP as I was tracking it using Cheat Engine during this time to make sure that all my kills were going to be valid. So that was a bit of an annoyance, but after going back to the Great Swords, after remembering that, hey, these are probably a little bit higher damaging than our Grand Lances, we were finally able to get through the Rotten, and boy, let me tell you, this was a huge wave of relief as I was really stuck on the Rotten. Out of every boss except for one, which is coming up later, the Rotten easily took the most number of attempts and the most amount of time in this run. I easily have like 8 to 10 hours of footage with just attempts on the Rotten, fishing for crits or doing weird tests and whatnot. So after taking him down, a huge sigh of relief overcame me. Of course, I already mentioned the Lightning Clutch Ring, but we're also able to get Flynn's Ring here in the Shulva DLC, although I don't remember if I accidentally threw my footage away for it, so I don't have footage of it. But yes, indeed, we got that in the Lightning Clutch Ring, which are 2 huge power spikes for us. No time for dilly-dallying. It is time for our next Lord Soul holders in the Duke's Dear Freya. And again, this was another very nice reprieve, as she's actually got like 5,500-ish HP. So with all of the upgrades that we have acquired at this point, including our dual chicken wings, our Sunlight Blade, Flynn's Ring, Lightning Clutch Ring, all the goodies, this was one of the easier fights, and I'm pretty sure I also did this one on the first try, which I was very happy because I really dislike this fight whenever you don't have a torch in your left hand. It tends to be quite annoying. And while we're down here, you know, the good Duke himself is a target, and he has by far the lowest HP out of any enemy that is a target in this run, with a whopping 400. Yes, he has 400 HP, and to put that in comparison, some of the bosses that we're taking on have upwards of like 7,000. So I really don't understand it, because even like the spiders in this area have like 300. So just a weird little quirk about the game. After taking down Freja, there's really only one direction for us to go at this stage, and that is Velstadt. Now, Velstadt is an enemy with a lot of HP. It's not significantly higher than some of the bosses that we face, but he also has pretty good physical defenses. And with the setups that we have been using, we have been relying a lot on physical damage. Ultimately, I had to go back to that same strategy of using a poison spell, applying a resin, and then getting him done that way. But I was finding a lot of trouble in this fight, as using power stanced great hammers was forcing me to heavy roll, because of course we want to stay under 60 equip load to get the maximum benefit out of Flynn's Ring. It's certainly doable with this setup, but there was a couple of attempts where I ended up dying at the end, as I just couldn't get out of the way, or I panicked or whatnot. I also tried doing one tick of poison and then using the gold pine resin instead, but that was just shy of getting the 2-shot. So instead I did something that I have never done in this game, and that was go back to Brightstone Cove and take the piggies on a long journey down to get ourselves the pickaxe. Now, the pickaxe by itself, at least in some of my testing, as a solo weapon is pretty gosh darn awful, as the hit tracking is just terrible. However, it has the benefit that it is classified as a great hammer, and thus can be power stanced with a lot of the bigger weapons in game, and it has a colossal 150 counter rating, just shy of the Grand Lance, and of course because it can be power stanced with better weapons and has a higher raw physical output than the Grand Lance itself, this leads it to being one of the stronger weapons in this type of run. So you'll see here, once I finally get it, I was able to get Velstadt once. I ended up dying at the very end because I missed out on a crucial dodge, but luckily I was able to come back on the very next attempt and get Velstadt down in the 2-shot, which then opens up ourselves to getting Sacred Oath. Now, because we are going to be approaching Aldia's Keep next, I went back and took out Lucatiel, because I wasn't sure if she would despawn after we killed her invader brother in the passageway to Aldia's Keep. So there's 2 points for us. And then, of course, we're going to start the Navlon quest line, so I went ahead and took down the requisite NPCs to get all their gear so that we can take care of the quest line all in one fell swoop. He will, of course, reward us with the very powerful Unleash Magic, which is basically like Brightbug, but for magic, and it doesn't require us to use a Brightbug. And then while we're in Aldia's Keep, we can also pick ourselves up Soul Geyser, which is the strongest sorcery in the game. Because I knew that this was the most powerful that we could inevitably get, outside of getting the Dragon Torso Stone in just a bit, I wanted to go back and see if Darklurker was finally going to be able to be doable with our setup. Luckily, we are able to get one good cast off in his phase 1, and then we wait for him to split into 2 phases, target the far Darklurker copy, cast Soul Geyser, and because it pierces, we are able to take down Darklurker in 2 shots, which not only gives us the point, but also gives us access to Climax, which is bar none the strongest single target damage output spell, hex, miracle, whatever in the whole game. And of course, now that we have Climax, we can go ahead and redo our Grandale kill proper. Now for some cleanup before we start making our way into the very end game and taking down some late game bosses and doing our NPC and mini-boss, what have you. The Executioner's Chariot was hanging out there, and this is a very interesting case here where with our Unleashed Magic and Soul Geyser setup, we are more than capable of clearing his HP in 2 hits. Like it's obviously not a contest, we do like 60% of his HP on our first hit. But what happens when you take him down to below 1 HP is he actually gets stuck on 1 HP and will hang over the pit indefinitely until you hit him with another incoming damage source. I tried with Force and whatever the Shockwave, I think is what it's called, the sorcery, but he'll hang up there forever. So ultimately, we decided that if you're able to clear his HP by more than 100%, this is going to count as a 2-shot. And for whatever it's worth, he actually doesn't take damage from the impact when he's hanging up on the ledge. He only takes the 1 HP of damage whenever he hits the death plane. I forgot to capture the footage for this, but just trust me, and we'll count this as the 1 point. Tichigran is also in the area, so let's go ahead and take him down. And fun fact, he is also the voice actor for Mog. At least that's what I've heard. I guess I didn't verify it, but spreading unfounded knowledge on the internet, that's what YouTube is made for, right? And sticking with our setup of Unleashed Magic and Soul Geyser, the Guardian Dragon was a bit of a pushover as well. Even got the rare animation where we kill him in midair, so he falls down on his back. And a little bit more catharsis here as we move into the end portion of the run. As long as we have a poppable soul that gives us more than 5,000 on use, we're able to take this back to the Smelter Demon fight, use Climax once, pop the soul, use Climax again, and take down the Smelter Demon. And again, this was one I was very, very happy to have done. His death then also allows us access to the Ring of Blades +1, which is a nice little power increase. Now here in the Dragon's area, we can also take down Dragonfane Villard and get ourselves the Petrified Dragon Egg, which will allow us, of course, to enter the Dragon Covenant. And this is really going to be the last power spike in our game, as this gives us the ability to use the Dragon Torso Stone once we farm enough Dragon Scales. Can also claim the Ashen Mist Heart, and for those of you wondering about the Ancient Dragon, let's just say no. Finally winding down into the end game is the Giant Lord in the Memories. Climax is easily enough to get the 2-shot on him owing to his dark weakness. And now we come to the Gank boss fight at the very end of the run in the Throne Watcher and Defender that honestly made me question whether or not Engraved Gauntlets actually worked with spells, as I must have hit the Throne Defender, let's say about 75 times before I finally got the crit chance. Talking with some of the other people that were doing this challenge, I think there are some other, startup variables or something that control when crits actually happen. But from what I could gather, the 1 in 20 chance is true, but there are some other forces that are at play when it actually rolls for you to get a crit. Now, before we tackle some of the late game stuff, NPCs and mini-bosses, there was one more boss that I knew that we could go through in one shot, and that was, of course, the Gank Squad in the Shulva DLC. This does require parries and ripostes, at least on the guy decked out in full Havels. I think backstabs you might be able to do. The other ones, I'm not entirely sure. I was having trouble with getting the backstabs to one-shot them at times. So just going through and getting the parries and ripostes, even for how weird I think the animation looks in Dark Souls 2, was more than enough to get the one-shot on all of them and claim ourselves the 2 points. So some last minute power spikes here. We go back to Majorauld and join the Dragon Covenant. Farm up those 20 Dragon Scales. I say farm one and then do with the rest of them. And then get ourselves the Dragon Torso Stone. And unlike DS1 here in Dark Souls 2, the actual increase in attack output does not scale with the Covenant rank, so we don't need to get up to +3 or anything like that. And full disclosure, I did not get Nishandra, as this was right around the end of the competition. The cutoff date was the end of November, and I was doing this at the last week of November on Thanksgiving break. So I did not get her. My main focus was on Ava, and unfortunately, I must say, I also was unable to get Ava in this run. I did try over and over and over again, and from what I can tell, the amount of damage that I was able to output without the status effect, that being poison, was by far the most amount of damage I've done in a single hit here in Dark Souls 2 with a melee attack. With the smelter sword in my left hand and the pickaxe in my right, I was able to clear well over 3,500 damage on a couple of runs. Now, my calculations did show that we would be able to do just about 4,500 damage with the Chandler Trident buff, the Dragon Torso Stone buff, Sacred Oath, Resonant Weapon, all the goodies. But we would also need the Ring of Blades +2, and we would also need both hits to be counter hits in order to get the 2-shot. So it technically is possible if you get all those conditions right. The odds of that happening, I think, are pretty astronomical because the windows are so tight. You'd probably have to reapply the Chandler's Trident buff at least once in the fight, and I'm just not sure it would be possible with this setup. Maybe it would be possible if I was able to do some poison shenanigans, but again, as I was kind of coming up towards the end of the run for this competition, I was just not able to do it. I also think it would be possible if I were able to get a crit with the pickaxe and then maybe get a Dragon Torso Stone buffed counter hit, again with the pickaxe in right, smelter sword in left, and that was without the Ring of Blades +2, which of course is locked behind Chandra. But that's where I left it in terms of bosses. From this point on, I was not able to get any more bosses, and I just decided let's go on a rampage, getting all the mini bosses and NPCs. So enjoy a brief montage. Before we go, I also just wanted to do a little bit of theory crafting, and I gave myself a permanent 1.5 times damage multiplier to effectively simulate what it would be like if we were able to crit every single hit of every single attack, as it, of course, increases your damage output by 50%. Definitely a couple that would have been doable. And man, if we could have gotten past Ava, there was a couple of points sitting on deck for us in both Lud and Zalin. I'm pretty sure the Burnt Ivory King would have been able to be two-shot, even if in my testing video I didn't. It was just more of a proof of concept thing that I was doing here. But Elsana would have been gotten, and the couple of mimics in the DLC would have also been able to be taken down. The real interesting thing that I find is that basically every boss in the game outside of Ancient Dragon, Vendrick, and then Fume Knight would technically be able to be two-shot if you got like the most insane luck of all time with some good counter hits and critical hits using the setup that I have. Again, might be possible with some other setups, but the Power Stance Smelter Sword in my left hand, Pickaxe in my right, and then all the relevant physical damage buffs was the strongest possible setup that I could find at the tail end of this run. And it really surprised me just how strong some counter hits with this setup were. Like, obviously, I knew that counter hits were very strong, but sometimes it takes a little bit to just kind of look at it visually and understand exactly how much extra damage you can get on top of your normal hits in Dark Souls 2. So before I leave, I just want to say thank you so much for sticking around with me. This is by far the longest video that I've put out, I think by maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I don't remember what the longest actual one I have is. And outside of, I think, the Elden Ring one-shot videos in New Game Plus 7, this was easily the most research and most amount of time that I have dedicated to a video like this. I want to say a big thank you to Lemon and all of the other competitors in this, especially the people that I had not really talked with before. It was a really neat experience doing so, and I'm glad I was invited by Lemon to take part in this, even though I'm almost positive that I didn't win, and I'm probably going to come in on the lower side in terms of total points amongst all the competitors. Just the fact that I was able to do this and really engross myself in a community of other Souls creators was a really cool moment for myself. Obviously my content has slowed down a little bit towards the back end of this year, just due to real life circumstances, that and the fact that I spent about 2 months making a couple of mods for Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, and am now working on the Elden Ring mod in the same fashion. But I would definitely like to get back to putting out some more challenge type videos, more interesting stuff, mechanics based things, which is certainly on the horizon for me. So again, a big thank you to everybody who has stuck with me this long. Thank you everybody for watching. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, or a subscription. Be sure to go watch everybody else's videos. I know when I am recording this one, JK Leeds is out. I think Doomwolves might be out. At least I think it was up on his Patreon. So be sure to check out everybody else that was involved, because I'm sure there's going to be some strategies that I did not discover that I definitely missed out on. Until then, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful time.
Bear the curse. Once the fire is linked, souls will flourish anew, and all of this will play out again. It is your choice to embrace or renounce this.